The snow was a soft, romantic lie falling across the Parisian bistro, Le Secret. Inside, Elias Vance, impeccably dressed and acutely bored, checked his watch. 7:37 p.m. 37 minutes late. He signaled for the check, convinced his blind date experiment was statistically a failure. The scent of a 1,000-year-old thunderstorm, ozone and cinnamon, hit him before she did. The entire dining room hushed as she entered. She was wearing a floor-length dress of deep crimson velvet, but it was her back that commanded the silence. Two immense, leathery dragon wings, the color of dried blood, were folded with an impossible, terrifying grace behind her. She reached his table, her eyes a stunning, molten gold. "Forgive me," she murmured, her voice a low vibration. "Parking for a 40-foot wingspan is a perpetual problem in this city." She was a vampiric wyvern, a mythical predator. Elias, a rational man who dealt in numbers, felt a cold terror mixed with professional fascination. He managed a shaky smile. "Elias Vance. I'd offer to pay for valet, but I'm afraid I don't carry currency accepted by ancient mythical beings." "Lysandra Morwen," she replied, taking her seat. Her gaze was not a flirtation, it was an assessment. "You are attempting to be charming, Elias, while your pulse is racing at 140. I appreciate the effort. Let's skip the small talk. I did not come here for dinner. I came for a test." Lysandra revealed the horrifying truth. Her species was fading. Their elemental magic was dying. The ancient, desperate solution was to seek out the lesser blood, a human with a rare dormant synchronization marker. Elias was that human. "Your bloodline holds the key to our revival," she explained, her voice hardening. "If you are compatible, you will be bound to me and our race will survive. If you are not, I am bound by the law of kinship to terminate your lineage before it contaminates our final chance." He was not a date, he was a genetic resource with a single deadline, the arch-wyvern's patience. Elias's calculated life felt instantly meaningless. He was terrified, but a deeper, more dangerous emotion took over, defiance. He looked at the beautiful monster who had just handed him an ultimatum. "I always hated blind dates, Lysandra," he said, rising. "Too much small talk. I'll take your offer. But know this, I am not here to be a resource. I am here to negotiate a merger. And I demand a controlling share." A genuine, predatory smile finally spread across Lysandra's face. "Welcome to the darkness, Elias Vance." They walked out together, the snow turning into a blinding storm around them, leaving the mortal world behind. The transition was violent. One moment, the soft lights of Paris. The next, the crushing pressure of Etheria, the hidden realm of the wyverns. It was a subterranean city carved from black, volcanic rock, lit by massive, pulsating blue crystals. The air was thin, cold, and charged with raw, barely contained magic. Elias felt tiny. The wyverns he saw were not disguised. They were monstrously beautiful, with scales of charcoal and obsidian, and eyes that glowed with elemental fury. They looked at him with unconcealed contempt. "Adjust your perspective, Elias," Lysandra instructed, now utterly formal, her voice sharp. "Here you are not a man. You are an ingredient." She led him to the throne room, a vast hall where Lord Valerius, the arch-wyvern, waited. Valerius was an immense figure, his wings like cracked granite, his power an oppressive weight. Valerius looked down at Elias and sneered. 30 sunrises, human. That is the time allotted for your trials of trust and intellect, he boomed. If you prove your blood is potent enough for my daughter, you will be bound to her. If you fail, you will be consumed by the court. Do you accept this, or do you choose immediate oblivion? Elias stood straight against the crushing aura. I accept. But I did not come here to be useful. I came here to negotiate. My survival is the non-negotiable term. His defiance was met not by applause, but by a chilling, throaty laughter from the shadows. A second wyvern stepped forward, Lord Kale. He was younger, sleeker, with eyes of burning crimson, Lysandra's designated fiancé. The Archfather is truly desperate, Kale hissed, circling Elias like a hungry shark. To choose this vermin who smells of fear and balance sheets over my own pure lineage. Worry not, human. 30 days is too generous. I'll personally ensure your contract is terminated early. Lysandra escorted Elias to his stark, stone chamber. She spoke only to issue warnings. Kale is powerful and believes I should rule with him. He will use every moment to sabotage you, she whispered. You must learn our customs. You must learn our history. You must never trust anyone. She paused, her golden eyes meeting his, a fleeting moment of vulnerability returning. Your first trial will not be of the claw but of the mind. You must find a flaw in our most sacred history. Do this and you live another day. Fail, and even I cannot save you. The heavy stone door sealed with a final echoing thud. Elias was alone, a small, soft human locked in a chamber of stone and monsters. He had abandoned a life of predictable certainty for a war of survival. The clock was ticking. He had 29 sunrises left to save not just his life, but his entire human race. The chamber was lavish by human standards, but in Etheria, it was a gilded cage. Tapestries woven from glowing crystal fibers adorned the walls, depicting wyvern history, endless cycles of conquest, power and fire. Yet the luxury was chilling. Every surface was cold stone and the massive windowless walls felt like the lid of a tomb. Elias Vance walked the perimeter, his expensive suit replaced by rough, dark leather, a uniform that simultaneously hid him and marked him as a captive. His analyst mind was already running simulations. He was a black swan event in the wyvern ecosystem, and his only path to survival was to treat Etheria like a hostile takeover target. Gather data, exploit weaknesses and control the narrative. His gaze settled on the wyvern texts provided to him, thick scrolls of cured dragon hide. Lysandra's warning echoed in his mind, the first trial will not be of the claw but of the mind. You must find a flaw in our most sacred history. Elias didn't read the texts for facts, he read them for inconsistencies. He devoured the centuries-old wyvern history, a timeline that detailed their glorious symbiotic relationship with the elements, fire, ice, earth, and air, and their eventual retreat to the shadows as their powers waned. The wyverns believed the decline was due to the great human infestation, the rise of weak mortals corrupting the world's latent magic. But Elias saw a pattern he recognized from flawed quarterly reports, cherry-picked data. He noticed a specific 500-year period, known as the Age of Ascendancy, where the wyverns were at their peak power. Yet, the texts were strangely vague about the source of the immense elemental energy during that time. They only credited pure wyvern genius. No civilization, no matter how powerful, maintains an energy peak without a corresponding resource, Elias realized. It was the fundamental law of physics and finance. The wyverns were lying to themselves, or perhaps, their historians were. He found the flaw, a tiny, almost erased footnote in a chant about elemental summoning, mentioning a forgotten tribute of the lesser. The wyverns hadn't been weakened by humanity, they had been sustained by a small, select group of humans whose latent magic they had peacefully borrowed during that peak period. The texts had deliberately rewritten this coexistence into a narrative of human betrayal to justify their current isolation and contempt. Elias had found their deepest, most guarded cultural wound. Their greatest strength was based on an alliance they now denied. The massive stone door groaned open, revealing Lord Kale. The red-eyed wyvern was radiating hostility, scales shimmering with barely suppressed anger. The Archfather demands your presence, human, Kale sneered, his voice laced with venom. Do try not to disgrace yourself before the elders. I placed a wager on your early demise. The council hall was intimidating. Valerius sat on his black throne, flanked by 4 elders, wyverns embodying the 4 elements. Lysandra stood to the side, her face an unreadable mask of cold duty. Elder Pyros, fire, began the trial. Human, for your first test of kinship, you must recite the true cause of the wyvern's elemental decline. Speak the lie of your race and receive your judgment. Elias ignored Pyros and addressed Valerius directly. My lord Archwyvern, the texts provided are inaccurate. They are not history, they are propaganda. A ripple of angry murmurs went through the council. Kale let out a low hiss. Elias held his ground, his voice calm and clear, the voice of a man explaining the stock market to a room of nervous shareholders. The wyverns did not decline due to human infestation, Elias stated, projecting confidence. You declined because you cut the power cord. He laid out his analysis. The Age of Ascendancy required a resource. That resource was a temporary, peaceful siphoning pact with the original marker-bearing humans. The wyverns, in their arrogance, decided they could sustain that level of power without the human alliance, ending the pact too soon. You weren't betrayed by humans, Elias concluded, looking directly at Lysandra. You betrayed yourselves by letting ambition override symbiotic necessity. A terrifying silence followed. Lord Valerius's scales turned a shade darker, and the temperature in the room dropped. Elias braced for the death blow. But before Valerius could speak, Lysandra stepped forward. Her cold mask cracked slightly. My lord, the human speaks with the precision of the first scholars, she said, her voice formal yet urgent. The Forgotten Siphoning Pact is mentioned only in the restricted texts of the Elder Archives. Texts he was not given. He did not read the data. He analyzed the void in the data. Lysandra's defense was not one of affection but one of logic. Elias had found the precise knowledge their bloodline needed, the truth about why the synchronization marker was required. Valerius glowered, his heavy wings scraping the floor. He found the flaw, yes. But he found it with human intellect, a logic we discarded centuries ago. And that, Elias interjected, sensing his opening, is why I am valuable. You are too close to the picture. Your wyvern logic is rigid. Mine is adaptable. You need my analysis to guide your power. Valerius stared at him, hatred warring with desperate necessity. Finally he spoke, his voice rumbling like an earthquake. He has passed the trial of the mind. But the trial of kinship is not complete. He fixed his gaze on Lysandra. The human must now learn the language of magic. You, my daughter, will be his tutor. He is now your responsibility. If he fails to bond with the elemental energies, you will both pay the final price. The judgment had been passed. Elias was safe for now. But his life was now inextricably bound to the terrifying woman, and their next failure would be mutual. Lord Kale, enraged by Elias's survival, merely smiled, a cold, certain promise of future malice. The next cycle plunged Elias into the terrifyingly illogical world of wyvern education. His classroom was a vast, shimmering chamber known as the Elemental Forge, where raw magic manifested as sheets of green fire and swirling electric dust. His tutor, Lysandra, was mercilessly efficient. Human logic is an anchor here, Elias, Lysandra explained, her golden eyes focused on a floating sphere of plasma. You cannot calculate magic. You must feel the resonance of the elements through the synchronization marker in your blood. Reach out. Let the fire recognize you. Elias tried. He closed his eyes, visualizing his ancestors' forgotten magic. But instead of the deep, elemental connection Lysandra described, he felt only a faint, annoying itch in his veins. He was a man of concrete data trying to grasp smoke. Days blurred into a frustrating cycle of failure. Lysandra grew increasingly strained. She was risking her life on his ability to perform a feat she herself could barely explain. I can read the intent of a 1,000-page merger document in an hour, Lysandra. Elias finally snapped, sweat pouring down his face after a failed attempt to summon a spark. But I cannot make a damn pebble levitate. What am I missing? Lysandra sighed, the sound a low, almost mournful rumble. You are missing faith, Elias. Faith in the absurd. Faith in your own untapped chaos. They were never truly alone. The Wyvern Court viewed Elias's training as morbid entertainment. Lord Kale in particular was an ever-present shadow. He would stand on the upper balcony of the forge, his crimson eyes gleaming, a perpetual smirk fixed on his face, mocking Elias's every stumble. Kale knew he couldn't kill Elias outright now that the Arch-Wyvern had assigned the trial. But he could certainly ensure Elias failed morally and mentally. One afternoon, Kale descended, his power radiating heat. Lysandra instantly stiffened. My dear cousin, your effort is commendable, Kale purred, circling Elias slowly. But your human pet is useless. He is a distraction from your duties. I have a proposal. A true test. Kale ignored Lysandra's warning hiss and addressed Elias. The human mind, I am told, excels at pattern recognition and deduction. Not magic. I propose a gauntlet, a small, focused test of your boasted human intellect that will save time for everyone. He laid a small, ornate silver music box on a pedestal. In this box, Kale explained, is the key to a vital memory, a secret of the Arch-Wyvern that will aid Lysandra in her next diplomatic mission. The box is secured by a series of 4 elemental riddles. If you, the analyst, can open it within the hour, you prove your mind has value. If you fail, you publicly admit your blood is inferior, and you forfeit the next 2 days of magic training, leaving Lysandra exposed to my superior counsel. It was a transparent trap, a challenge designed to humiliate, yet Elias saw the calculated risk. Kale was trying to buy time to sway Lysandra's father. Lysandra's glare warned Elias to refuse, but he took the bait. An hour? I'll take 30 minutes, Elias countered, the familiar thrill of the corporate battlefield returning. The riddles were complex, woven in the ancient wyvern language, playing on elemental knowledge Elias barely possessed. Riddle 1, Fire. I am born of the rock's sorrow, I devour the past but hold no shadow. I am the true crown of the Archfather's might. Kale waited, confident. Elias realized the answer wasn't fire, but the byproduct of elemental fire. Obsidian. He whispered the word. Click. Riddle 2, Ere I carry the voice of giants, yet I cannot be heard inside the deepest mountain. Elias thought of Etheria, its oppressive silence. The answer was simple, physical, wind. Click. The riddles sped up, growing more philosophical. Elias wasn't using magic, he was using contextual data analysis. He saw Kale's mistake. The wyvern saw riddles as poetic truths. Elias saw them as poorly designed security questions. Finally, the fourth riddle landed. Riddle 4, Earth/kinship. My touch is cold, my weight is sorrow, yet I am the only thing a wyvern will die to protect. Elias looked at Lysandra. Her face was tense, but her gold eyes held a desperate plea. This riddle wasn't about the element Earth, the bedrock of Etheria. It was about what was buried beneath it. Earth holds secrets, Elias murmured. But Kale is testing kinship. The one thing a wyvern will die to protect is not gold, not fire, but the bloodline itself. He spoke the wyvern word for progeny. Click. The box sprang open. Elias pulled out the key, a small, tarnished silver disc, and handed it to Lysandra. The entire event had taken 18 minutes. Kale's face was a mask of cold fury, his scales darkening to an angry crimson. He had been outsmarted by a human playing a parlor game. You win this round, analyst, Kale spat, his eyes promising retribution. He vanished into the shadows, defeated but not deterred. Lysandra looked at Elias, a strange mixture of admiration and fear in her expression. You passed a physical gauntlet with sheer logic, she said, her voice barely a whisper. No wyvern would ever have thought to interpret the riddles in such a detached way. Elias smiled, exhausted. That's the benefit of the lesser blood, Lysandra. We have no arrogance to get in the way of survival. Now, about that elemental training. Lysandra handed him a ceremonial glass of wyvern nectar, a thick, shimmering drink. A victory draft, she explained. A tradition. Drink. Elias lifted the glass, tired, relieved, and momentarily trusting. But the instincts of the analyst, the man who scrutinized every word of a contract, resurfaced. He smelled the drink and his eyes narrowed. He looked past the nectar's sweetness to the faint, metallic scent hidden beneath. This is not just nectar, Lysandra, Elias stated, his voice flat. It's laced with stasis dust, a mild paralyzing agent. It won't kill me, but it would ensure I fail the next 3 days of training, just as Kale planned. He had won the gauntlet, but the poison gift proved that in Etheria, trust was still the ultimate lie. He set the glass down, unbroken. The true trial had just begun. Elias stood by the heavy stone desk in his quarters, the untouched glass of poison nectar still gleaming in the low light. The victory was hollow. He had passed a mental test but immediately failed the test of survival. You should have trusted me, Elias, Lysandra murmured, her voice tight with controlled shame. She had returned after Kale's departure, knowing Elias would not drink the nectar, but appalled that the rivalry had sunk to poison. Elias shrugged, meticulously cleaning his hands with a cloth. Trust is a quantifiable risk, Lysandra. The data suggested Kale would retaliate. The data was correct. Now let's use his poison gift. He took the small, tarnished silver disc, the key he won from Kale's music box, and placed it on the desk. The fourth riddle was about the bloodline. Kale thought I'd die before using this to unlock a deeper secret. He clearly underestimated the human tendency to over-prepare. Lysandra's expression shifted from guilt to focused interest. That key does not belong to the common archives. It is a lock code for the Elder Archives, the hidden wing that holds the unedited raw history of our species. The things the Arch-Wyvern wants forgotten. Under the cover of the Midnight Cycle, when Etheria's elemental light dimmed and most wyverns retreated to their stone nests, Elias and Lysandra moved. She led him through winding, dark passages, her immense wings pressing close to the carved walls, her presence a dangerous shield. The Elder Archives were not grand. They were a cramped, oppressive cavern, the air thick with the dust of millennia. Instead of glowing tapestries, the walls were lined with desiccated scrolls and stone tablets filled with microscopic script. Lysandra used the silver disc on a concealed mechanism, and a section of the wall hissed inward, revealing the forbidden section. This is where the true rot lies, Lysandra whispered. The history of the siphoning pact, the truth you deduced. They worked quickly, Lysandra translating the cryptic wyvern, Elias applying his lateral thinking. They found the scrolls detailing the original peaceful pact of confluence. The agreement where Elias's marker-bearing ancestors willingly lent their magic to the wyverns during the Age of Ascendancy. It wasn't a parasitic relationship, Elias muttered, pointing to a diagram. It was symbiotic. The human kin got protection, knowledge, and a stable environment. The wyverns got power. Then they found the real damning secret, the rupture. The wyvern records claimed the humans broke the pact out of greedy fear. The Elder Archives told a different story. The script described Elias's ancestor, a human scholar named Alistair Vance. Alistair was not a betrayer. He was a protector. A section of the text, carved onto a brittle slate tablet, detailed Alistair's final message. He discovered that the relentless siphoning process, necessary to maintain the wyvern's ascendancy, was slowly killing the human hosts. It wasn't an immediate death, but a slow, decades-long deterioration of their life force. Alistair didn't break the pact out of greed, he broke it out of mercy. He used his small innate magic to shatter the elemental anchors of the pact, forcing the wyverns into the decline they now blamed on humanity, but saving his descendants and Elias from certain slow extinction. Lysandra ran her clawed finger over the script, her eyes wide with horrified understanding. The Archfather never told us this. He let us believe we were superior and betrayed. This is why the marker is so rare now. Alistair nearly destroyed it to protect his kin. Elias felt a surge of cold pride mixed with profound dread. His ancestor wasn't a traitor. He was a hero who made a devastating, necessary sacrifice. But that truth, if revealed, would not save Elias. This changes everything, Elias said, his voice quiet. The Arch-Wyvern is not looking for a cure. He's looking for a repeatable weapon. He wants to restart the siphoning pact, knowing it will kill my bloodline, but not caring as long as his own is saved. The revelation forced a profound shift in their dynamic. Lysandra no longer saw Elias as a test subject. She saw him as the inheritor of a sacrifice, a man whose life was a coin in her father's cruel game. And she saw the lie that her entire civilization was built upon. Lysandra's golden eyes, usually cold and detached, were filled with a fierce new resolution. I am the next in line for the throne, Elias, she said, her tone absolute. My duty is to my people. But my duty is not to lies and slow murder. If my father means to repeat this atrocity, he risks the same collapse and he risks my leadership. You are not a pawn, Elias. You are now my ally. She extended her hand, the movement a clear, dangerous deviation from her father's rules. This was the first true act of trust. Elias took her hand, the cool strength of her grip a stark contrast to his nervous human warmth. An alliance then. The terms? Simple, Lysandra stated. You teach me how your human logic works, how to see the flaws and the risks. I will teach you to bond with the elements, not for the siphoning but for genuine shared power. We will save my species without destroying yours. They were no longer playing the Arch-Wyvern's game. They had forged a dangerous, forbidden partnership, built on a shared secret that could get them both executed. The true trial had just begun. The clandestine training sessions were conducted in the deepest, most stable chamber of the elemental forge, a place where the raw magic flowed consistently yet subtly. Lysandra was relentless, pushing Elias to reach past his logic and into his latent magical synchronization marker. Forget the numbers, Elias, Lysandra commanded, her voice sharp with strain. The elements are pure emotion. Channel the righteous fury of your ancestor, Alistair. You were betrayed. Use that anger. Elias tried to feel the anger, but he only felt frustration. I'm an analyst, Lysandra. My righteous fury is reserved for incorrect pivot tables, not ancient prophecies. He was failing, yet Lysandra was succeeding in her half of the alliance. Elias was teaching her how to use his human logic, how to identify weak points in court politics, how to create contingency plans, and how to maintain detachment in high-stress scenarios. She began to see the cold, effective brilliance of the lesser blood. One afternoon, during a concentrated exercise on the element of ice, the air in the chamber plummeted to an unbearable temperature. Lysandra was attempting to forge a shield of diamond-hard frost, demonstrating the control she wanted Elias to achieve. But something went terribly wrong. The shield didn't stabilize. Instead, the frost turned black, jagged, and began to grow inward, enveloping Lysandra's hand and moving rapidly up her arm. Her breath hitched and a silent, primal terror flashed across her golden eyes, a terror that had nothing to do with Elias's failure. Lysandra roared, not a sound of strength but of agonizing pain. She shattered the ice with a violent burst of her innate fire magic, collapsing onto the cold stone floor, clutching her scorched and frostbitten arm. The sheer force of the rebound magic was enough to send Elias stumbling back. He rushed to her side, ignoring the lingering magical fallout. "Lysandra, what happened? You lost control." Her usual composure was shredded. She was breathing in short, ragged gasps, her scales flickering with distress. The cold, it consumed me. It always tries to consume me." Elias, the analyst, instantly became the caretaker. He stripped off his leather tunic and pressed it firmly around her injured arm, stabilizing the bleeding and frostbite. "This is not a simple loss of control," Elias observed, his voice calm and focused. "This is a physical repulsion. Your body is rejecting the deep cold." "Why?" Lysandra pushed herself up, her regal posture slowly returning, but her eyes held a confession. She knew Elias had earned the truth. "The wyverns rule the elements, but we have our vulnerabilities," she began, her voice a low, painful admission. "When I was a hatchling, Lord Valerius, my father, was challenged for the throne. The rival used an ancient, forbidden weapon, a blade forged from silver and pure, crystallized ice." She looked at her chest, just above her heart. There, beneath the thick, crimson velvet of her dress, was a faint, star-shaped scar, a spot of discolored, pale scale that had never fully healed. "I took the blow for my father," she whispered. "The blade was removed, but its essence remained. It bonded with my heart. Now, while I command the element of fire, the element of ice is my poison. The deep cold seeks to claim the weakness in my very heart." Elias realized the profound gravity of her secret. A wyvern who feared the cold was like a fish that feared water. This was not a political vulnerability, it was a fatal flaw that could be exploited by anyone in her court, especially Kale. "Does your father know?" Elias asked softly. "He knows the scar is there but not the crippling truth," Lysandra admitted. "He believes I can conquer it. But if Kale knew, he would challenge me to a trial by ice, a test that would kill me instantly, securing his claim to the throne." In that moment, Elias saw her not as a mythical dragon princess, but as a terrified woman carrying a terminal diagnosis. This humanized her fully in his eyes. He stopped seeing her as a test, and started seeing her as an ally worth protecting. Elias finished bandaging her arm with methodical care. "Your wyvern solution is to overpower the weakness. My human solution is to mitigate the risk." He pulled out a notepad, a small, contraband item he had smuggled from his old life, and began to sketch a series of complex, interlaced symbols. "If the ice is rejecting your heart, we won't try to master it," Elias explained, his eyes glowing with the focus of a true analyst. "We will build a firewall. We use the synchronization marker to create a secondary elemental buffer, a shield of pure earth or iron resonance. It won't grant you power over the cold, but it will block the feedback loop, neutralizing the poison." Lysandra watched him, utterly captivated. His approach was cold, logical, and brilliant. It was the antithesis of wyvern thinking, which was always about dominance over nature. "You speak of protecting my power with your weakness," she breathed, half in awe, half in fear. "No," Elias corrected, meeting her gaze. "I speak of protecting my investment with my intellect. You are my controlling share, Lysandra. I won't let you be poisoned by your own element." The alliance had become something deeper than politics. It was survival, fueled by a forbidden secret and a shared, profound vulnerability. Lysandra was finally trusting Elias with her life, and he, the man who hated chaos, was dedicating his entire logic to saving a dragon. The alliance was sealed, not with a ceremonial kiss, but with a complex design etched onto Elias's contraband notepad, the elemental firewall blueprint. For the next 2 cycles their training shifted. Elias learned to channel his nascent magic not into raw power but into stable geometric defense, a concept baffling to the wyverns. Lysandra, meanwhile, began viewing Etherean politics through Elias's lens of risk assessment, realizing how thin the veneer of her father's security truly was. "Kale is not the only threat," Elias murmured one morning, examining a flaw in the forge's pressure seals. "Any wyvern who fears the arch-wyvern's instability, or fears your eventual ascension, wants my blood spilled. I am the catalyst of change, they want the status quo." The attack came not from the court but from the shadows. Lysandra had led Elias to the lower caverns, a sprawling network of tunnels beneath the forge, to practice grounding his synchronization marker with pure earth resonance. It was remote, damp, and supposedly secure. They were deep within the tunnels when a chilling, high-pitched scream echoed down the cavern walls. It was a wyvern distress call, immediately followed by the sound of rapidly beating wings. Lysandra reacted instantly, shifting into combat mode. Her wings snapped out, her muscles coiled, and her golden eyes flared with elemental fire. Stay behind me, Elias. This is not Kale's style. This is an assassination attempt. 3 figures descended from the ceiling, wyverns of a lesser, more brutal line. Known as the Rift Scales, mercenaries hired to do the court's dirty work. They carried crude, massive axes coated in dried, black venom sap, a substance toxic to both human and wyvern alike. The arch-wyvern sends his regards to the human mistake. The largest assassin snarled, leaping towards Elias. Lysandra intercepted the blow, her body a blazing crimson shield. She met the assassin's axe with a searing blast of fire from her mouth, a devastating move that momentarily staggered the attacker. But the other 2 rift scales were faster. They flanked her, forcing her to dedicate her magic to defensive blasts, leaving Elias exposed. Elias was defenseless, yet his human mind was his weapon. He didn't run. He looked at the terrain. The cave floor was riddled with large, crystalline clusters, and the air was heavy with humidity. When a rift scale lunged at him, axe raised, Elias didn't dodge. He threw himself into the wyvern, surprising the massive creature with the sheer irrational force of his momentum. As they tumbled, Elias used his bare hands to grab a sharp, jagged piece of crystalline quartz. He didn't aim for the soft flesh. He aimed for the most valuable wyvern commodity, the scales. With a desperate, animalistic grunt, Elias jammed the quartz shard into the tiny thin gap beneath the wyvern's foreleg, a well-known weak point he had read about in the Elder Archives. The wyvern shrieked, an ear-splitting sound of pain, its armor breached. Lysandra, seeing Elias fight, gained a terrifying burst of focus. She abandoned fire and unleashed a blast of pure magnetic force, a minor elemental subset of Earth, that ripped the weapons right out of the assassin's hands, pinning the venom-sapped axes harmlessly to the cavern wall. The battle was brief but brutal. Lysandra, relieved of the defensive strain, used a stunning display of controlled force to neutralize the 2 remaining assassins. She didn't kill them, she bound them in shimmering, unbreakable ropes of solidified plasma. She rushed back to Elias, whose heart was hammering against his ribs. He was breathing hard, his hand bleeding from the quartz shard, but he was alive. "You are insane," Lysandra gasped, her own fire subsiding. "Why didn't you run? You are slow, weak." "I am predictable," Elias cut her off, his eyes blazing with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. "I knew where they would strike. I knew their armor's weakness. I didn't fight as a wyvern, I fought as a problem solver." He held up his injured hand. "Look at me, Lysandra. I took down a rift scale with a piece of rock, not magic. Your kind relies on power. My kind relies on ingenuity. Together, we are something they cannot analyze." He had proved his worth not with his marker but with his humanity, his adaptability and ruthless precision. Lysandra didn't speak. She knelt, her great, terrifying golden eyes soft with gratitude and a fierce, possessive loyalty. She used a lick of soft, controlled plasma to instantly cauterize his wound. "Kale will know about this soon," Lysandra said, standing up. "He didn't send them, but he will certainly claim the victory of their demise. We must turn this assassination attempt into a political weapon. We need information." Elias looked at the assassins, bound and groaning. "I have ways of extracting data that don't involve fire, Lysandra. You might be surprised what a simple, desperate wyvern is willing to trade for an early release." The assassination attempt had failed. But it had cemented the alliance into an unbreakable bond of shared blood and shared secrets. News traveled through Etheria faster than a fire drake in a thermal updraft. The failed assassination in the lower caverns became the court's only topic. Lysandra had been prepared for Kale to claim credit for the Rift Scale's defeat, but the truth was far more insidious. Lord Kale didn't deny the attack, he spun the narrative. He publicly claimed that the Rift Scales were not sent by a rogue faction, but were a desperate move by the Arch-Wyvern security detail to test Elias's loyalty, a test the human failed by resorting to primitive savagery, instead of pure elemental power. Kale then added the crucial, poisonous twist. He suggested that Elias had arranged the attack on himself to gain Lysandra's sympathy. Lysandra was furious. "He is twisting the truth. We bound them, Elias, with elemental magic. That proves my power and your ingenuity." Elias, however, saw the brilliance of Kale's move. "He isn't debating the facts, Lysandra, he's debating the intent. His narrative appeals to the wyvern ego. Humans are inherently deceptive, even in self-defense. He is playing on their most cherished prejudice." The court's atmosphere had soured. Lysandra's position was weakening, and the arch-wyvern, sensing instability, called for an immediate, unscheduled council. The hall was freezing. Valerius sat on his throne, radiating controlled fury. Cale stood beside him, a picture of righteous concern, his red eyes fixed on Elias. "Daughter," Valerius began, his voice thunderous. "Lord Cale suggests this human is a source of chaos, not cure. Furthermore, Cale's historians have unearthed new context regarding the rupture of the siphoning pact." Cale stepped forward, his smile chillingly victorious. "Archfather, we were wrong to assume Alistair Vance merely broke the pact out of mercy. My findings confirm he did so using a powerful forgotten human spell designed to corrupt wyvern resonance. A spell meant to cripple us forever. This was not sacrifice, but an act of biological warfare against our entire race." He slammed a scroll onto the marble floor. It was a perfectly forged document, using the same cryptic language Elias had only just learned to decode. Elias felt the air drain from his lungs. Cale hadn't found the Elder Archives. He had manufactured a counter-narrative so compelling and damning that it directly attacked the foundation of Elias and Lysandra's shared secret. The council elders began to murmur, the wyverns thrive on vengeance, and the idea of a targeted human magical attack was an insult too great to ignore. "Elias Vance," Valerius demanded, "is it true your ancestors sought to destroy our elemental core?" Elias knew he had two options: lie, which the wyverns might magically detect, or tell the truth about the siphoning pact, which would expose Lysandra's secret vulnerability to the whole court and confirm they had violated the arch-wyvern's direct order to avoid the restricted archives. He chose the third option, the calculated risk. He met Valerius's glare, his human spine rigid. "My lord, the document is a forgery intended to justify murder," Elias stated calmly. "My ancestor acted to save his kin, not destroy yours. I demand to present my findings from the Elder Archives, the true history." This was Lysandra's cue. She stepped forward, her voice filled with desperate authority. "My lord, the human speaks truth. The Elder Archives hold the clarity we need. Cale's testimony is a calculated lie." But Cale was ready. "The human has clearly corrupted you, Lysandra. The fact that you defend his access to forbidden texts only available to the Archfather's trusted scholars, proves your conspiracy. You gave him the key to the archives. You betrayed your father's command." The arch-wyvern's face was a mask of cold stone. He didn't care about the truth of the siphoning pact, he cared about obedience. Lysandra had broken the sacred law of the court by sharing restricted information with the ingredient. "Silence!" Valerius roared, the elemental power making the hall shake. "My daughter has shown disloyalty. She is excused from the trials. As for the human..." He fixed his gaze on Elias, hatred winning the internal conflict. "Elias Vance, on the charge of conspiracy and espionage against the Wyvern throne, a charge which is now supported by my daughter's disloyalty, you are hereby imprisoned. Lord Cale, prepare the human for the trial by judgment." Guards, massive, armored wyverns, materialized instantly and seized Elias. Lysandra lunged forward, elemental fire flickering dangerously on her talons. "Father. No. He is the only hope. He is a failure," Valerius countered, his voice dripping with finality. "And you, daughter, will witness the termination of his bloodline. Now be silent." Elias was dragged away, his eyes locked with Lysandra's. Her face was a mixture of devastation and fierce resolution, the promise that this was not the end. He was going to prison, but he had given her the ultimate weapon, the motive to fight. Elias's imprisonment was brief but brutal. He wasn't physically tortured, the wyverns were far more sophisticated. He was subjected to the elemental dampening, a constant, subtle magical draining that sapped his energy and muffled the precious synchronization marker in his blood, making him feel physically weak and mentally sluggish. He was dragged from his cell to the Hall of Judgment. It was the same council room but stripped of all ceremony. The great volcanic throne of Valerius sat empty, replaced by a semicircle of ancient, gray-scaled judgment elders. Lysandra was present, standing not with the council, but near the defense alcove, her face etched with profound despair and rage. Lord Cale stood opposite, smug, already enjoying the spectacle of the human's annihilation. The trial was a sham. The Wyvern Law was not about truth, it was about the preservation of the bloodline. Cale presented his forged documents, detailing Alistair Vance's magical corruption of the Wyvern resonance. He argued that Elias was a spy, sent by the remnants of the human lineage to complete the ancestral task of destroying Etheria. The human's intellect is a toxin. Kale thundered, his scales flashing crimson. He tricked Lysandra into violating sacred laws. He represents chaos and contamination. The only viable path is to purge the marker from existence, beginning with the final disposal of Elias Vance. The judgment elders listened with cold finality. Their gaze was heavy, their verdict clearly premeditated. Elias was not being asked to defend his life, he was being asked to accept his death. Elias stepped forward, ignoring the paralyzing fear and the elemental dampening. He knew wyverns respected only strength and audacity. He would not beg. He would negotiate. He spoke, his voice hoarse but steady, the voice of an analyst presenting the only viable alternative to bankruptcy. I am not here to deny my ancestors' actions, Elias began, addressing the elders directly. I am here to analyze them. Yes, Alistair Vance broke the siphoning pact. But I submit that the documents provided by Lord Kale are a fallacy based on flawed data analysis. He explained his theory from the Elder Archives without admitting he read the forbidden texts. My ancestor didn't corrupt your power, he removed a fatal dependence. Your true flaw is not contamination, it is arrogance. You rely on pure dominance, which leads to instability. He looked at Lysandra, a silent plea for her to choose the truth. The synchronization marker is not a weapon of destruction. It is a key to stabilization. You need my human logic to guide your immense power, to build the firewall against the ice that threatens your most valued asset. Before he could utter the word Lysandra, Valerius interrupted, his anger shattering the pretense of the trial. Enough. You continue to speak of betrayal and conspiracy. You have shown no elemental loyalty. Valerius roared. The verdict is decided. You are contaminated. Guards, prepare the final sentence. Kale's face broke into a triumphant snarl. The guards advanced. At that moment, Lysandra Morwen, the cold, regal wyvern princess, abandoned her duty. She stepped out of the defense alcove and, in an act of staggering defiance, fully extended her immense crimson wings, blocking the path of the guards and overshadowing the entire council. Her gold eyes burned with the elemental fire she had sworn to control. Stop. Her voice was a booming, melodic challenge that drowned out even the arch-wyvern. The judgment is flawed. I, Lysandra Morwen, heir of the arch-wyvern, invoke the trial by kinship. The trial by kinship was an ancient, rarely used ritual where the accused protector, kin, could offer their own life as collateral. Lysandra wasn't just defending Elias, she was wagering her life and her claim to the throne. The human has shown me the true path to stability. He built a logical firewall against the instability that you, father, refused to acknowledge. Lysandra continued, desperation making her reckless. She then committed the final, unforgivable act of exposure. My lord, my strength over the element of ice is a lie. I carry a scar from a silver ice blade near my heart. Kale knows this. He is using this sham to remove the marker, eliminate me and seize the throne. She revealed her weakness, turning Kale's narrative against him. Kale paled, his fury replaced by shock. Valerius was silent, his power faltering as his most closely guarded secrets were exposed. Lysandra had sacrificed everything, her shame, her vulnerability, and her perfect obedience, all to save the human. The trial by kinship is granted. Valerius finally declared, his voice broken. The accused and the protector will face the final synchronization now. If the marker stabilizes our bloodline, you are both free. If it fails, your sacrifice is demanded. Elias was rushed to the center of the hall, standing opposite Lysandra. The elders began the painful, final ritual, drawing on the elemental forces of the cavern and focusing them on the pair. Raw, unstable energy, half fire, half ice, began to swirl between them. Lysandra channeled her energy, her scales glowing. Elias, fighting the dampening, reached with his mind for the familiar, comforting geometry of his firewall design. The energy surged violently, threatening to tear them apart. Lysandra cried out in pain as the ice essence sought the wound near her heart. Elias, she screamed, her face contorted. The ice is too strong. Stop. Save yourself. Elias ignored her. He poured all his human willpower, all his analyst's focus into the marker. He wasn't using wyvern magic, he was using human logic to create a shield. He pushed the elemental energy away from her heart, shaping it, stabilizing it, building the promised earth iron firewall. The wyvern fire and the human logic met, not to dominate but to merge. A blinding white light erupted, followed by an explosion of silent, stable energy that rocked the Hall of Judgment. The blinding white light that exploded in the Hall of Judgment was the climax of everything. Lysandra's desperation, Kale's malice, and Elias's terrifying gamble. It was not the raw elemental fire or ice. It was the pristine, balanced energy of synchronization. When the light faded, silence returned. Lysandra and Elias stood exactly where they were, but they were different. Lysandra's breath came in deep, shuddering pulls. Her scales, previously dull with emotional distress, shimmered with a vibrancy the court hadn't seen in centuries. The scar near her heart, the mark of the silver ice blade, was gone, not healed but sealed. A faint, metallic gray line like an alloy marked the spot. Elias, exhausted but intact, felt a sudden, profound calm. The crippling elemental dampening was broken. More importantly, he felt a strange, thrilling warmth in his veins, a constant, stable energy that was both his and Lysandra's. He had successfully built the firewall using the synchronization marker, not to siphon power but to stabilize it. He looked at Lysandra. Her golden eyes were locked onto his, filled not with duty, but with a complex mix of awe and possessiveness. Their minds were momentarily linked. He felt her relief, her power, and her fierce loyalty to the human who had saved her from her own element. The synchronization was a success. The Judgment Elders stirred, their ancient faces showing genuine shock. Lord Valerius, the Archwyvern, rose from his seat, his massive frame trembling not with anger, but with overwhelming joy and relief. The marker is pure. Valerius boomed, his voice echoing with renewed strength. The decline is halted. The bloodline is saved. He ignored Kale, who stood paralyzed with shock and fury. Valerius descended the steps and placed one massive, grateful claw on Lysandra's shoulder. The trial by kinship is past. Lysandra Morwen, you are officially vindicated. Elias Vance, he turned to the human, his gaze now filled with calculated respect. You are no longer an ingredient. You are the key. You are free. But freedom came with a wyvern price. However, Valerius continued, addressing the silent court, my daughter violated the sacred law by accessing forbidden texts and harboring a fugitive. To restore order and compensate for the shame brought upon her, and to secure the vital asset that you are, Elias Vance. Valerius pointed a claw towards Kale, whose eyes lit up with sudden, desperate hope. Elias Vance, your life is spared, your human kin is safe, and your alliance is acknowledged. But your freedom is tethered. You will be permanently bound to Lysandra as the consort of the marker. And Lysandra Morwen, your final sentence is this. You will marry Lord Kale within one cycle to consolidate the ancient houses and stabilize the political future of Etheria. The hall erupted. The wyverns understood the move. Valerius had saved his bloodline and regained political control simultaneously. Lysandra got her power, Kale got his title, Elias was trapped. Lysandra looked at her father, her face a mask of slow-burning fury. Father, he is my consort. The bond is permanent. Precisely, Valerius stated coldly. You will command the bloodline with Elias, and you will rule Etheria with Kale. The human will provide the stability, the wyvern will provide the legacy. Kale stepped forward, his smugness returned 1,000-fold, a glint of genuine victory in his eyes. He addressed Elias directly. Congratulations, Consort Vance. You live. You gave my future wife the power to ascend. Now you will stand beside her throne, but you will never sit upon it and she will never be yours. Elias looked at Lysandra. She was the one woman in two worlds worth fighting for, and she was being forced into a political marriage with his sworn enemy. He had risked everything for their stability, and the ultimate reward was his own emotional torment. But Elias Vance was a survivor. He was an analyst, and he had just gained a foothold in the most powerful, dangerous court in two realities. He met Kale's triumphant sneer with a steady, calculated glare. I understand the terms, Lord Kale, Elias said calmly, the new, subtle elemental energy in his voice lending it a low, dangerous resonance. But I advise you to study my old profession. In a hostile takeover, the consort is often the majority shareholder. And the majority shareholder always wins. He turned back to Lysandra, his gaze a silent promise of war. He was free but he was captive. He was weak but he was the key. He would not lose her to Kale, not after what they had shared. The synchronization was a success, but the battle for her soul, and his future, had just begun. The air in the Hall of Judgment had cooled, but the tension was thicker than ever. Elias was now the consort of the marker, a title that was half gilded cage, half political weapon. Lysandra was the powerful heiress who had just sacrificed her heart for her species, now chained to both her savior and her rival. Elias was escorted to his new quarters. They were no longer the simple stone chamber of a prisoner, but a luxurious, sprawling suite adjacent to Lysandra's own, a space befitting the consort. The golden thread in the tapestries now felt like a very real chain. He was alone for the first time since the verdict. His body felt energized by the successful synchronization, his mind sharper than ever. He could now feel the faint, rhythmic pulse of Lysandra's elemental magic, a deep, resonant warmth that settled comfortably beneath his own consciousness. They were biologically bonded but politically separate. The door hissed open and Lysandra entered. She was stripped of her formal wyvern battle attire, dressed in simple silk, but her demeanor was one of cold, controlled fury. "You should be celebrating, Consort Vance," she said, her voice devoid of warmth. "Your life is safe and your bloodline is secure." Elias met her gaze. "And yours is miserable. You saved your people from annihilation only to be trapped in a loveless marriage with the one wyvern who tried to kill me 3 times. That is the price of succession, Elias," Lysandra countered, running a tired hand through her silver blonde hair. "My father secured the bloodline with you and he secured the political stability with Kale. The wyvern way is to prioritize power over preference." Elias stepped closer, forcing her to acknowledge the biological reality they now shared. "The sync bond is not preference, Lysandra. It is a fundamental link. You cannot marry Kale and maintain this bond without risking both our stability." Lysandra's golden eyes flashed. "I will manage it. But until the marriage we have new rules. Rule 1. We must appear publicly as allies and romantically bonded, to ensure the court believes the synchronization is strong. Rule 2. You are my consort, you are loyal to me and you will not publicly challenge Kale no matter his provocation. Rule 3. Privately you will continue your analysis. You will find a flaw, a legitimate, political, wyvern reason, to halt this marriage, or you will forever be the stable foundation for Kale's throne." Elias smiled, a dangerous, calculated smile. He was back in his element, high-stakes strategy and exploiting loopholes. "Understood," he said. "The arch-wyvern has created a hostile joint venture. The purpose of a joint venture is to exploit a market, and the purpose of a merger is to acquire assets. I am here to facilitate an acquisition of your hand, your throne, and your species' future. And I will start by analyzing the bridegroom." Elias didn't have to wait long for the bridegroom. A loud, arrogant rap echoed on the door, and Lord Kale swaggered in, ignoring the custom of being announced. "Consort Vance," Kale drawled, his red eyes filled with malice and triumph. "My wife-to-be seems occupied. I came to deliver a gift." Kale tossed a small, heavy box onto the table. Inside were a set of shimmering, gold-plated chains, wyvern courtship gifts, but clearly a symbol of Elias's new bondage. "Etheria expects you to wear these," Kale purred. "A constant reminder of your place, a useful pet tethered to the main bloodline. I suggest you start getting used to the look, analyst, because after the wedding your role will be purely ornamental." Lysandra stepped between them, her elemental power flaring dangerously. "Take your filth and leave, Kale. The consort answers to me." Kale ignored her, his eyes fixed on Elias. "A word of advice, human. I know you share her secrets. I know she carries weakness. If you ever think of using your mind to destabilize my wedding, I will not kill you. I will ensure your death is so slow and public that Lysandra will hate you for the desperation in your eyes. Enjoy your new chains." Kale left, the threat hanging heavy in the air. Lysandra sank into a chair, overwhelmed. "See," she whispered. "He wins, Elias. He always wins because he is willing to be ruthless. He has the political capital." Elias picked up the golden chains. He didn't look at them as bondage but as a tool. He secured them around his own wrists, the metallic cold a reminder of his commitment. "Kale is predictable, Lysandra," Elias stated, his voice now imbued with the calm authority of a man who held the highest cards. "He has an obsession with power and vengeance. But ruthlessness without logic is just violence. He has the political capital but I have the intellectual capital, and now I have the synchronization bond." He extended his hand, the golden chains gleaming. Lysandra took it, the contact sparking the shared energy of the sync bond. "We need a political flaw that is impossible to ignore. A mistake Kale made that risks the entire wyvern future," Elias stated firmly. "And we have to find it before Christmas Eve arrives again." The alliance had shifted from survival to subversion. Elias was no longer fighting for his life, but for the life they could have together. Lysandra provided Elias with what he requested: access to Lord Kale's territorial and historical archives. These weren't kept in the Elder Archives, but in a sprawling public section detailing Wyvern land claims and treaties, a mountain of complex, dense information that made human real estate law look like child's play. Elias had a week before the first official pre-marriage ceremony. His new office was his suite, where he pored over the documents. Lysandra helped translate the archaic legal Wyvern script, but the work was Elias's alone. He was in his element, the golden chains on his wrists now merely an inconvenient accessory. Wyverns measure wealth in two things, Elias, Lysandra explained, leaning over a map detailing the volatile Northern Shards region: raw elemental reserves and legacy. Kale's house, the House of Kalen, is ancient. Its value is tied entirely to its land. Elias nodded, his eyes scanning the data points. And where there is value, there are hidden liabilities. Kale is obsessed with appearing powerful. That suggests he's overextended himself. He found the flaw exactly where he expected, in the margin. Lord Kale's ancestral territory spanned the Northern Shards, a desolate, magically unstable region rich in iron ore, a vital resource for Wyvern armor and defense. The treaty showed Kale had recently taken on immense debt to finance an expansion of the mining operation, promising Valerius a large annual share of the refined ore. This mining project is the key, Elias murmured. It's Kale's biggest claim to power and the reason Valerius values him. He's projecting stability. But Elias noted a discrepancy in the elemental data. The Northern Shards were prone to unpredictable earthquakes, not just physical tremors but magical ones, where the raw earth element briefly destabilized. Kale's historical records showed an unnerving frequency of minor production delays. Elias, applying his knowledge of corporate fraud, saw the pattern. He's not having delays, Lysandra, Elias stated, pointing to a 5-cycle gap in the ore output. He's having catastrophic failures. The earthquakes are getting worse. He's hiding the damage to his primary mine, and he's been secretly borrowing iron ore from the Arch-Wyvern's emergency reserves to cover his contractual obligations. Lysandra's eyes widened. Borrowing from the reserve? That is an act of desperation. If that reserve were exposed as depleted, it would be seen as a direct threat to Etheria's defense. The plot deepened. Elias traced Kale's covert reserve borrowing back to the source. Kale wasn't just hiding a failing mine. He was systematically draining the Wyvern's emergency defense stockpile to fund a project he couldn't control. The iron ore deficit was massive, a multi-million-ton black hole hidden beneath layers of false reporting. Kale doesn't just have a failing asset. He has a terminal liability, Elias declared. His lineage is built on a lie of stability. If Valerius exposes this deficit before the marriage, Kale's house loses its legacy, his contract is voided, and his political power vanishes. Lysandra stood tall, her inner fire blazing with renewed hope. This is it, Elias. The purely political flaw. My father will prioritize the safety of the realm over his daughter's marriage. But how do we prove it? Kale has the books perfectly balanced. We don't go after the books, Elias said, a predatory glint in his human eyes. We go after the inventory. We need proof that the emergency reserve is physically empty, and we need it before the pre-marriage feast. The plan was dangerous. The emergency iron ore reserve was located in a heavily guarded, restricted area known as the Vault of Silent Stone. Only the Arch-Wyvern, the Judgment Elders, and Lord Kale himself had access. Lysandra knew the political fallout would be disastrous, but the risk was worth the freedom. They had to act immediately. Elias devised a plan that relied purely on psychology and misdirection, designed to bypass Wyvern security, which was built around brute force magic rather than human stealth. We won't break into the vault, Elias explained. We'll force Kale to expose the deficit. We create a calculated leak, a rumor that someone is trying to steal iron ore from the emergency reserve. Kale's paranoia will force him to rush to the vault, not to check the inventory, but to reseal the entry point he knows he covertly breached. The rumor would be planted during a minor public event. Once Kale was seen rushing to the vault, Elias and Lysandra would follow, exposing the act of covert entry, which would force the Arch-Wyvern to inspect the inventory. Kale's obsession with control will be his undoing, Elias concluded, the golden chains on his wrists now feeling like the keys to his freedom. It's a hostile acquisition, Lysandra. And we're about to show the court that Kale's entire legacy is built on a negative asset. The pre-marriage feast was not a celebration, it was a ritual display of power. The Wyvern court assembled in the Grand Hall, a room now overwhelmingly dominated by the heraldry of House Kalen. Tables groaned under the weight of exotic raw meats and shining elemental nectars. The whole atmosphere felt heavy, oppressive, and utterly hostile to a simple human. Lysandra entered on the arm of Lord Kale, fulfilling the political demand of the arch-wyvern. Kale wore a triumphant smirk, his scales polished to a metallic sheen. Lysandra was beautiful, regal, but her eyes, when they briefly met Elias's, were a promise of shared determination. Elias was present as the consort of the marker, his golden chains gleaming brightly, a living trophy of Kale's future control. He was positioned at a minor side table, close enough to be observed, far enough to be dismissed. This was his staging ground. The core of Elias's plan was to leverage Kale's paranoia over his hidden iron or deficit. The rumor needed to be believable, urgent, and linked directly to Kale's most sensitive asset. Elias waited for the precise moment, during the arch-wyvern's opening toast, when elemental energy was deliberately lowered for the traditional bonding ritual. He used the sync bond, the subtle, constant connection he shared with Lysandra, as his tool. He channeled a tiny, almost imperceptible sliver of raw magical energy, something he could now do since the synchronization, and focused it on a low-level wyvern guard known to be a fearful gossip. Elias didn't speak. He projected a simple, urgent image into the guard's mind, the vault of silent stone. A fissure opening. Iron or reserves pouring into the chasm. The guard, overwhelmed by the sudden, focused mental shock, gasped, sputtering the words, "The vault. The iron is leaking." The guard's panic, amplified by the hall's sudden elemental quiet, broke the ceremony. Wyverns began to murmur, their attention immediately drawn to the threat of territorial loss and resource depletion. Lord Kale's face, which had been set in triumphant stone, cracked instantly. His composure shattered. He glanced quickly at Lysandra, suspecting her, but he knew she was focused on the ritual. The rumor was too specific, too linked to his most fatal secret. Kale did not wait for Valerius's command. He knew if the arch-wyvern inspected the vault and found the deficit, his marriage, his house, and his life were forfeit. Slander. Kale roared, trying to maintain control. The vault is secure. I shall prove it. Archfather, grant me leave to inspect the seals immediately. Kale didn't rush to check the inventory. He rushed to check the integrity of the covert breach he had been using to siphon the ore. He had to ensure his secret entry point was sealed before anyone else saw it. Kale snatched a ceremonial torch and practically sprinted from the hall, leaving the arch-wyvern standing with his unfinished goblet of nectar. Valerius was utterly bewildered by the chaos. He looked at Lysandra, then at Elias, trying to find the source of the rupture. Lysandra was ready. She detached herself from the stunned arch-wyvern and immediately turned to Elias. The plan is in motion. He is heading for the hidden entry point he used to drain the reserve. If he seals it before we expose him, the deficit remains unproven. Elias rose, his golden chains rattling a dramatic rhythm. He knew his role, the witness. With all respect, arch-wyvern, Elias said clearly, projecting his voice across the hushed hall. If Lord Kale is so certain of his innocence, he wouldn't abandon his bride feast. His frantic rush suggests guilt. I, as the consort of the marker and the repository of our stability, must ensure the realm's defense is not compromised by the erratic behavior of a hopeful heir. Elias followed Lysandra. The two rushed through the Wyvern City, the terrifying dragon princess and the man in the golden chains, a vision of absolute, forbidden alliance. They found Kale not at the massive official entrance to the vault, but at a small, heavily disguised crevice hidden beneath a ceremonial fountain, the very covert entry point Elias's analysis had predicted. Kale was frantically channeling his elemental magic, attempting to fuse the stone back together. Kale? Lysandra shouted, firing a bolt of warning fire that scorched the stone near his feet. Stop your tampering. Kale turned, his face a mask of exposed paranoia and hatred. You poisoned the mind of that guard. You set me up, traitor. And you, human. You will pay for this audacity. Kale attacked, but not with fire. He aimed a massive, unstable blast of raw, chaotic earth magic at Lysandra, trying to bury her in rubble. But Lysandra was no longer fighting alone. Elias, using his firewall design, channeled a blast of pure, stabilizing energy from the sync bond. The elemental chaos hit their synchronized defense and fractured, allowing Lysandra to counter with controlled precision. The battle raged, but the fight was irrelevant. The arch-wyvern, led by the alarmed judgment elders, arrived on the scene. Valerius saw Kale, his chosen heir, fighting his future wife beside a clearly compromised, illegally breached entry point. Lord Kale, Valerius's voice was low, deadly, and final. Why were you attempting to seal a covert breach into the defense vault? The marriage was over. The flaw in the legacy was exposed. The vault of silent stone became the execution ground for Lord Kale's ambition. When Valerius inspected the covert breach and the tragically empty emergency iron or reserve, the lie that built House Kalen was exposed. Kale's desperate rage and exposed political treason were undeniable. Valerius, the arch-wyvern, was consumed by two powerful emotions: relief that the bloodline was secured, and savage fury over the treason that risked Etheria's defense. Kale was stripped of his titles, his lands confiscated, and he was publicly disgraced before the court. His house was dissolved. Justice in Etheria was swift and final. The wedding is nullified, Valerius declared, his voice echoing with cold authority. The stability of the realm is paramount. Elias and Lysandra had won the battle but not the war. The realm was now facing a new kind of instability, the iron ore deficit and the shame of a failed royal engagement. The Wyvern court demanded a solution, a symbol of absolute stability to secure the future. The elders turned to Lysandra. The bloodline is saved but the throne is not secure. The synchronization marker is the key to our future, and it must be legally protected. The consort must be bound to the heir. Valerius looked at Elias. The human had proven his ingenuity, his loyalty to Lysandra, and his immense value. But he was still human, a volatile element that the Wyverns feared more than treason. Elias Vance, Valerius stated. You are valuable but you are still the lesser blood. The synchronization is strong but the legal contract is weak. The court demands absolute, legal bondage to the royal line. You will remain the consort but you will never be equal. Elias knew this was his moment. He had eliminated the rival, but he had to leverage the remaining instability to force his equality. He stepped forward, the golden chain still on his wrists, and met the Arch-Wyvern's intimidating gaze. Arch-Wyvern, Elias said, his voice calm, projecting the absolute confidence of a man holding the most valuable asset. I agree. Legal bondage is necessary. The stability of the marker must be paramount, and the consort must be bound to the heir. However, the Wyvern law states that a consort is merely a title. A spouse is a legal partner with a vested interest in the legacy. He took Lysandra's hand, the sync bond flaring subtly between them. My lord, the entire bloodline's future now flows through me. If I am merely a consort, my loyalty is only to Lysandra. But if I am her legal spouse, my loyalty becomes irrevocably bound to the Wyvern throne itself, protecting your future from all external threats, including those who might challenge your choice of heir. He was using their fear of future threats, like Kale's remaining allies, and their reverence for legal contracts against them. He wasn't asking for love, he was asking for ownership in the joint venture. Valerius hesitated. To grant the human spouse status was unprecedented. It made Elias a Wyvern by marriage with a voice in court. But to reject him risked the unstable marker and the potential for Elias to simply walk away, taking the key to their salvation with him. Lysandra, understanding his strategy, reinforced the gambit. Father, the marker is strong. The union will make it unbreakable. I choose the stability of the spouse over the shame of the consort. Valerius, defeated by his own desperation, hammered his claw on the stone. The union is granted. For the sake of the bloodline, the human will be granted spouse status. The contract will be drawn immediately. The wedding was not romantic. It was a terse, legal ceremony conducted hours later in the very same hall. Elias stood beside Lysandra, the human in the golden chains, beside the dragon vampire heir. The vows were Wyvern and formal, a mutual agreement to ensure the survival of the bloodline. When it came time for the final ritual, Lysandra lifted his hand, the sync bond flaring as the final legal seal. Elias Vance, the lesser blood, you are now legally bound to the House of Morwen by sync bond and by Wyvern law. You are the spouse of the marker. The court was silent. The human had achieved the impossible. He had not only saved his life, but he had legally wed the dragon vampire princess who was once meant to be his executioner. Later, in their combined luxurious suite, Lysandra stood before Elias, removing the ceremonial Wyvern headpiece. You won, Elias, she said, her golden eyes filled with complex emotion. You have the throne, you have the lineage, and you have me, legally bound by my father's own decree. Elias stepped towards her, the golden chains now feeling light. He didn't move to kiss her. He reached out and gently removed the heavy golden chains from his wrists, letting them drop to the stone floor with a final echoing clang. I didn't do this for the title, Lysandra, Elias stated, his voice low and serious. I did this for the freedom to protect you. Now that the chains are broken, tell me, where do we begin the true takeover of Etheria? It was no longer an alliance of convenience. It was a partnership of power, bound by fate and a terrifying shared destiny. Elias and Lysandra were legally bound, but their honeymoon was a whirlwind of strategic planning. The Wyvern court had accepted their union not out of love but out of absolute necessity. Elias was the stable foundation for Lysandra's power, and she was his shield in Etheria. Lysandra now wore the symbol of their union, a ring forged from Wyvern iron and inlaid with a single stable earth resonance crystal, a public testament to the success of the synchronization marker. Elias, however, wore no new jewelry, only the invisible mantle of the spouse of the marker. Their first political challenge was immediate and material: the iron ore deficit. Kale's treason had exposed a massive hole in Etheria's defense stockpile. The Wyvern solution was to send a war party to conquer new iron-rich territories, a slow, costly, and destabilizing venture. Elias presented his counter-proposal to Lysandra. Your methods are too slow. A war will take cycles, deplete more elemental energy, and create new rivals. My human world has advanced metallurgy and mining that your kind abandoned centuries ago. We don't need a war, we need a shipment. Elias proposed an unprecedented plan, a covert one-cycle return to the human world. The Arch-Wyvern wants to restore the iron reserve. I will source the required volume of purified iron ore from a human corporation I know, one that values profit over politics. We will trade it for something they cannot manufacture, a stable elemental alloy I will personally synthesize using the sync bond. Lysandra was wary. To return to the Lesser Blood's realm is to risk exposure, Elias. And to trade Wyvern secrets for human metal is blasphemy. Blasphemy saves time and lives, Elias countered, pulling out a meticulously drafted trade contract, written in Wyvern script. This contract doesn't transfer elemental secrets, it transfers stable product. And my exposure is a risk worth taking. I am the only one who can navigate the human world without drawing magical attention. Lysandra studied the contract. It was airtight, precise, and ruthless, the perfect example of the human logic she had learned to respect. Very well, spouse, she agreed, her golden eyes gleaming with ambition. You will go. But you will not go alone. You are too valuable to risk. Lysandra created the portal not in Paris, but in the desolate highlands of the Scottish Cairngorms, a place of weak magical interference. They stepped through the fold, and Elias felt the sickening lurch of re-entry into his old reality. The contrast was immediate. The air was soft and humid, the sky was a familiar gray, and the overwhelming scent of ozone and cinnamon was replaced by damp pine and heather. Lysandra, in her regal wyvern guise, looked stunningly out of place. The portal will remain open for one Earth cycle, Lysandra instructed, her voice a low command. I will wait here and guard the entry point. You will secure the asset and return. Elias quickly changed into the normal, unassuming clothes he had stashed away, a sharp suit that instantly felt more powerful than any wyvern armor. I need to be Elias Vance, the ruthless mergers analyst, he stated, tucking his phone into his pocket. That man knows how to get things done. Elias chartered a fast, private helicopter to London. He didn't meet the corporation's CEO. He met the corporation's ruthless head of supply chain, a man named Marcus Thorne, who had often tried to undercut Elias in the past. The meeting was brief, held in a sterile, glass-walled office overlooking the Thames. Thorne was skeptical but greedy. You need how much iron or Vance? And you're paying with what? Some unique metal alloy? This sounds like a scam, Thorne sneered. Elias didn't use threats, he used leverage. He presented a tiny credit card-sized piece of the synthesized earth iron alloy, the product of his initial sync bond experiments. The metal was light, impossibly strong, and completely resistant to terrestrial heat. This metal is not unique, Thorne. It is impossible, Elias stated, projecting the calm, dominant confidence he had learned in Etheria. I'm offering you the patent for a material that will revolutionize aerospace and defense manufacturing, a material that bypasses every known patent law. I want 100% of the iron or reserve you can move in 24 hours. And I want the transaction confidential. If you refuse, I take this patent to your competitor, and your stock dips 40% by sunrise. Thorne, the man of ambition, looked at the impossible alloy, then at the numbers. He signed the contract. The deal was done. Elias had used his human skill set to solve the Wyvern's biggest crisis in less than 12 hours. He was no longer just the spouse of the marker. He was the provider, the one who could bridge two realities. He returned to the Cairngorms, the massive transfer of iron or scheduled to follow him through the portal. He looked at Lysandra, waiting stoically among the ancient rocks. "The iron is secured, my wife," Elias said, a faint smile touching his lips. "And the cost was purely human currency, leverage and greed. Now let's go rule our kingdom." Elias and Lysandra returned to Etheria, not in triumph, but with undeniable proof of Elias's worth. The massive transfer of purified iron, or hundreds of tons, perfectly smelted, far exceeding Kale's contractual obligations, arrived through the portal just hours after their return. It was a logistical miracle, a feat of human efficiency that stunned the Wyvern court. The Arch-Wyvern, Lord Valerius, personally oversaw the replenishment of the Vault of Silent Stone. When the reserves were fully restored, Valerius called an immediate council. The hall was now completely silent, not with hostility but with awe. Lysandra stood beside Elias, the spouse of the marker who had solved the realm's gravest security crisis in a single Earth cycle. "The human has provided stability where Wyvern ambition caused treason," Valerius declared, his voice booming across the hall. "Elias Vance has proven the value of the marker and the strength of the Union. His authority is now official. He is designated the Consolidator of Resources." This new title was unprecedented. It gave Elias official control over Etheria's defense infrastructure and resource management, a domain previously reserved for the most trusted Wyvern warlords. Elias had not just survived, he had been granted executive power. Lysandra looked at Elias, her golden eyes conveying pride and a silent warning. "The more power you hold, the bigger the target on your back." Elias immediately began his consolidation. He replaced the Wyvern functionaries in the resource division, most of whom were Kale's old allies, with loyalists to House Morwen. He introduced new, meticulous human accounting standards for elemental reserves, making it impossible to hide deficits or siphon resources without immediate detection. He treated the entire Wyvern defense infrastructure like a failing corporation in need of restructuring. The result was instantaneous. Efficiency soared, transparency stabilized the court's frayed nerves, and the remaining threat of Kale's supporters diminished. Elias's success solidified his position as Lysandra's indispensable partner. He was not just the key to her elemental power, but the brain behind her political control. Their relationship deepened, built on mutual respect and shared strategy, blurring the lines between their alliance and their marriage. One evening, while reviewing the new elemental reserve reports, Lysandra reached out and gently touched the silver-gray scar where the ice blade had struck her. "You have given me stability, Elias," she whispered, a rare moment of vulnerability. "The realm is safe and I am safe from myself. You have fulfilled your vow." Elias looked at her, his eyes warm. "The vow was to protect you, Lysandra. The realm is just a necessary operational expense." While Elias was consolidating power in Etheria, his brief return to the human world had unexpected repercussions. In London, Marcus Thorne, the ruthless supply chain executive who traded the iron ore, felt a growing sense of unease. The elemental alloy Elias had given him was indeed miraculous, transforming his company's valuation overnight. But Elias Vance, the analyst who had just resigned from his firm without notice, had completely vanished. Thorne, driven by greed and suspicion, discovered that Elias had emptied his bank accounts, sold his assets, and his corporate trail had simply stopped in the Scottish Highlands. The entire iron ore deal, which had made Thorne rich, was now a massive, untraceable liability. Thorne realized he hadn't just made a profit, he had been used. Where did Vance get that alloy? Who was the seller? And why did he vanish immediately after the largest, most secretive iron ore purchase in decades? Thorne, using his own deep network of corporate spies and government contacts, began a cold, methodical investigation into the single impossible event: Elias Vance's sudden disappearance in the Cairngorm Mountains. He suspected corporate espionage, a superweapon, and betrayal, all of which were true, just not in the human way. He found the first faint hint. A local Scottish shepherd reported seeing a strange, massive flash of light and a woman with wings near the area of Elias's last known location. Thorne didn't believe in magic, but he believed in leverage. He knew that if he could trace Elias Vance back to his hidden competitor, he could reclaim his dignity and control the miraculous alloy entirely. The human threat, driven by simple corporate greed, had breached the perimeter. Elias Vance was now being hunted by the very world he had abandoned. Elias felt the change first, not through magic but through analysis. Despite the success of his restructuring, a cold disquiet settled over him. It was the familiar, unsettling feeling that a perfectly balanced spreadsheet contains a hidden, catastrophic error. He was reviewing the security protocols for the main portal to Earth, a system designed centuries ago to detect raw elemental disruption, like a massive magical blast or a wyvern accidentally crossing. "This is fundamentally flawed, Lysandra," Elias stated, tapping the complex wyvern schema on a massive stone display in his new resource office. "Your security is designed to stop a dragon, not a drone." Lysandra, who was working through diplomatic correspondence, looked up, confused. "A drone?" "Elias, our shields are built to repel siege fire. No human device can penetrate the mountain's mantle." "That's the flaw," Elias countered. "Your world protects against wyvern threats. My world's threats are silent, invisible, and electronic. Your defenses are passive, they wait for a magical attack. They are completely blind to modern human surveillance." Elias used the sync bond to borrow a tiny fraction of Lysandra's sensory magic. He channeled the energy not into an elemental blast, but into a passive scan across the magical barrier surrounding Etheria. He taught himself to interpret the faint feedback, looking for non-magical, technological disruption. The signal was faint, almost non-existent, but it was there. A constant, low-frequency ping originating from the approximate location of the Scottish Highlands, the site of their portal exit. "Someone is looking for us, Lysandra," Elias said, his voice flat with certainty. "That ping is a passive signal, likely a modern geospatial satellite or a high-frequency radar sweep. It's not magical, it's corporate espionage. Someone is tracing the anomaly where we disappeared." He explained Marcus Thorne, a relentless, greedy human who wouldn't stop until he understood the miraculous alloy and regained control over the narrative. Thorne wouldn't believe in dragons, but he would absolutely believe in a secret military weapon hidden in the mountains. "Thorne won't send an army," Elias warned. "He'll send technology, advanced sensors, deep penetrating radar, and potentially specialized burrowing drones. He's not trying to fight Etheria, he's trying to spy on the secret facility and steal our secrets." The threat was existential. If Thorne managed to capture clear sensor data, images of the portal, of Lysandra's true form, or worse, a sample of the raw magical energy, it would lead to two inevitable disasters. 1. Human discovery. The world's governments, alerted to a non-magical hidden civilization, would launch a full-scale military investigation, seeking to neutralize the magical threat. 2. Wyvern chaos. The arch-wyvern and the elders, seeing their secrecy compromised by a weak human technology, would blame Elias entirely for bringing the outside world to their doorstep, revoking his status and potentially restarting the purge. Lysandra finally understood the gravity of the threat. She looked at the raw stone walls of Etheria, realizing their magical might was useless against a satellite orbiting miles above them. "This is a war of the unseen," Lysandra murmured, her scales pale with worry. "Our entire defense system is built on elemental intimidation. It has no defense against logic and lenses." Elias acted immediately, drawing on his newly consolidated authority. He ordered the Resource Division to halt all visible surface operations and to begin redirecting their elemental energy usage. "We can't fight their technology with our magic," Elias declared. "We fight their technology with human countermeasures. We need to make Etheria look like a boring, geologically stable piece of rock." He devised a 3-point counter-strategy. 1. Digital decoy. Use a focused elemental pulse to create a momentary localized magnetic field, a human equivalent of a system crash, to fry any immediate surveillance hardware Thorne might have placed near the portal site. 2. Geological masking. Utilize the immense Earth elemental power to stabilize the mountain's magnetic and seismic signature, making the area appear perfectly dull and uninteresting on all human scans. 3. The human shield. Elias himself would have to return to Earth, covertly, to confront Marcus Thorne directly. He couldn't kill him, he had to negotiate his silence. "The threat is me, Lysandra," Elias concluded, the resolve hardening in his human eyes. "I brought the iron and I brought the risk. I am the only one who can eliminate the source of the leak. I must go back to London. And this time I go as the consort of the marker with the full hidden resources of the Wyvern realm at my back." Elias prepared for his second, more dangerous descent to the human world. Lysandra saw him off in the deep underground chamber that housed the portal. Unlike the first time, she was not just sending off a resource, she was sending off her legal spouse and the key to her stability. Lysandra had insisted on a compromise. She would not cross the portal, but she would maintain a constant, low-level sync bond anchor. I will be a faint awareness in your mind, Elias, Lysandra explained, her gold eyes intense. If you are in danger, I will feel it and I will channel my elemental power to you, a shield, a burst of speed, whatever is needed. But you must be conscious to receive it. Elias nodded, adjusting the subtle earth iron alloy weave he wore beneath his tailored suit, a personal elemental firewall against magical detection. Thorn is a predator who only understands leverage, Lysandra, Elias stated. I won't kill him, I'll ruin him. I need to show him that the cost of exposing Etheria is his complete financial and professional annihilation. With a final urgent clasp of hands, a mutual transfer of resolve, Elias stepped through the churning colors of the portal and emerged onto the cold, damp rock of the Scottish Highlands. The low, constant electronic ping of human surveillance was immediately noticeable, a low thrum against the elemental quiet. Elias tracked Marcus Thorn to his private, secluded penthouse in Canary Wharf, London. Thorn was working late, driven by obsessive greed, his desk covered with satellite images and complex radar readings of the Scottish anomaly. Elias walked into the glass tower, his human composure masking the elemental shield Lysandra was subtly maintaining through the sync bond. Thorn looked up, his face pale with shock and sudden, desperate hope. Vance? You ghosted. I knew it. Where have you been? Where is the source of that metal? Is it military? I want in on the patent. Elias didn't sit down. He walked slowly to Thorn's desk, picking up a radar image of the Scottish location. You're right, Thorn, Elias said, his voice calm, projecting the unwavering authority of an arch-wyvern. I wasn't on a vacation. I was securing the source of the metal. And you, Marcus, are about to make the biggest mistake of your career. Thorn, emboldened, grabbed a piece of the miraculous alloy, his eyes greedy. Mistake? I'm sitting on a billion-pound valuation. You can't stop me. Elias countered with cold, precise data, the language Thorn understood. Your company, Global Tech, relies heavily on a complex network of overseas shell companies for tax sheltering, Elias stated. I know the exact structural weakness, a legal loophole regarding mineral trade certifications in your Singapore branch, which I helped design 3 years ago. Thorn flinched. Elias had just named his Achilles heel. The iron ore you bought from me was an illegal asset transfer under that particular regulation, Elias continued. I have just filed an anonymous tip with the Singapore regulator. By tomorrow morning your stock will be frozen, your company will be under investigation, and you will be facing a lifetime ban from the financial sector. Your billion-pound valuation will be zero. Thorn was aghast. You wouldn't? That ruins me. That is my price for your silence, Elias said, leaning closer, his eyes sharp. You stop all surveillance of the Scottish Highlands. You delete every single piece of data you've gathered, satellite imagery, radar, everything. You publicly dismiss your anomaly as a geological survey error. And you never ever speak my name or the word wyvern again. Thorn, broken, slumped back in his chair. Why, Vance? Why do you care about some remote Scottish rock? What are you protecting? Elias allowed Lysandra's power to leak just a fraction. He focused his mind and the glass skyscraper shivered around them. A low, powerful earth resonance pulsed through the floor, making Thorn's papers rattle violently. I am protecting my family, Marcus, Elias stated, the truth now a terrifying, elemental weapon. I am protecting a world you cannot comprehend. You think you're fighting a rival corporation, but you are challenging forces that measure time in millennia and power in molten fire. He reached out and, with the precision of the sync bond, he channeled a tiny, localized magnetic pulse that silently and completely wiped Thorn's entire desktop and all his backup hard drives. The data is gone. The threat is neutralized, Elias concluded. Choose, oblivion now or a second chance at a mundane life. Thorn, staring at his blank screens and still feeling the earth tremor beneath the 80th floor, chose life. He was broken but harmless. Elias left the glass tower, the low ping of human surveillance already beginning to fade. He had used human logic to save the wyvern world. He was the bridge. He returned through the portal, triumphant, the cold air of Etheria feeling like home. The return through the portal was different this time. Elias was tired but not drained. Lysandra, waiting on the cold stone, rushed forward, not with the formality of a princess, but with the genuine relief of a partner. She looked him over, her golden eyes scanning for any sign of injury or technological contamination. Thorn is neutralized, Elias reported, the cold air of Etheria settling comfortably around him. His data is wiped and his career is in ruins. He won't speak. The external threat is gone. Lysandra didn't speak. Instead, in a rare public display of emotion, she rested her forehead against his, sharing the immediate profound release of tension through the sync bond. It was an unspoken conversation. You risked your life for me and you won. They returned to their shared suite, the massive, luxurious chamber that was their cage and their fortress. The successful mission cemented Elias's status as a hero of the realm and, more importantly, Lysandra's irreplaceable partner. That night, for the first time since the forced wedding, their conversation moved beyond strategy and survival. Lysandra was quiet, contemplative. When you were in the human world, Lysandra began, her voice soft, I felt the pressure you were under through the bond. When Kale used his magic, it was like a loud, violent thunderclap. When Thorn threatened you, it was a slow, cold burn, the fear of absolute failure. Elias realized that the sync bond was a two-way street. It wasn't just a conduit for magic, it was a connection for emotion. I felt you too, Elias confessed. When I was in Thorn's office and the building began to shake, I felt your raw, terrifying power. But I also felt your resolve, the silent anchor that kept my human mind from shattering. Lysandra moved closer, her immense crimson wings folded loosely, not in defense but in vulnerability. The Archfather bonded us for power, Elias. But perhaps its true purpose is intimacy, the sharing of burdens. She gently reached out, resting her clawed hand on his chest, precisely where the synchronization marker was strongest. She asked him to trust her with the fullest extent of the bond. We have fought Kale and the human world together, Lysandra said. Now, let us truly understand the unbroken union. Elias agreed. He closed his eyes and consciously opened his mind to the flow of the sync bond. What followed was not physical but a profound elemental merging. Lysandra channeled her energy, the fierce, molten fire of her wyvern core, into Elias's marker. Elias met it with his earth-iron stability, the human logic shaping the chaotic magic. Elias felt the wyvern power surge through him, a sensation that dwarfed any human experience. He saw flashes of Lysandra's memories, the ancient, terrible beauty of Etheria, the crushing duty of the air, and the singular, isolated pain of carrying the ice scar. The merging was overwhelming, terrifying, and deeply comforting. Lysandra, in turn, received the pure, quiet logic of Elias Vance. She experienced the structured calm of his mind, the ruthless efficiency of his analysis, and, most importantly, the profound, simple human desire for love and security that drove all his impossible decisions. She realized his ambition was not for the throne, but for the future they could build together. The merging stabilized Lysandra's element, giving her power precision. It empowered Elias, granting him control over his marker far beyond what Valerius had intended. When the moment ended, they stood apart, breathing heavily. They had seen each other's souls, the wyvern fire and the human logic, and they were irrevocably changed. Lysandra looked at him, her gold eyes now filled with a warmth that was fiercely protective. She had seen his weakness, his human fear, and chosen to shield it. My father wished for a consort bound by law, Lysandra whispered, finally shedding the last layer of her regal armor. He has created a husband bound by destiny. She stepped forward and took his face in her hands. This time the kiss was not ceremonial. It was deep, elemental, and final, the merging of the physical and the mystical. Elias knew then that the fight was over. He was home and he had won not a wife but a true partner. But the fight for the throne was far from finished. Valerius and the remaining forces of the Old Guard would not accept this human-led future so easily. Elias's consolidation of power and the successful, stabilizing sync bond made him untouchable in the eyes of the court, but only amplified the distrust of the traditionalists, especially the arch-wyvern himself. Valerius saw his daughter's growing human-influenced confidence, and it threatened his absolute authority. Lysandra and Elias's newfound intimacy was now reflected in their professional synergy. She provided the elemental raw force. He provided the strategic refinement. They were a perfect, terrifying political unit. One morning, Valerius summoned them to the hall. The mood was glacial, far colder than any previous meeting. Spouse Vance, Valerius began, his voice devoid of warmth. Your success with the iron ore and your management protocols have been noted. However, your influence on the air has made her unreliable. Valerius leveled his massive gaze at Elias. The court fears that your human logic will always prioritize safety over power. We need proof that the synchronization has made Lysandra stronger, not softer. I have decreed a trial of succession. a final elemental test that will prove her fitness to rule. The trial was a solo event for Lysandra, but it was designed to exploit her deepest weakness and expose Elias's influence. It was called the Ascension of the Ice Spires. The objective: Lysandra had to journey to the highest, coldest peak of the Etherian mountain range, where the raw, unstable ice element flowed freely, and forge a permanent succession sigil using pure, untouched elemental ice. Elias immediately understood the trap. You are forcing her to confront the element of her deepest vulnerability. Valerius only smiled, a cruel thin line on his massive face. If she is truly fit to rule, she must master her weakness. If the marker has made her stronger, she will forge the sigil. If the marker merely provided a human shield, she will be consumed by the cold. The consort is forbidden from entering the spires. The test was not only to prove Lysandra's strength but to force a choice. If she failed, Elias's influence was broken. If he intervened, their legal bond would be severed, and he would be executed for treason. Lysandra prepared for the trial with grim determination. Elias could not go, but he could prepare her. They spent their final hours in deep meditation, connected through the sync bond. The ice will seek the old scar, Lysandra, Elias warned her. It will try to shatter your elemental composure. You cannot fight the ice with fire, that only creates steam and instability. Elias taught her the final, most complex maneuver of his human logic-based magic: elemental deflection. Use the sync bond, but only as a pathway, Elias instructed, channeling a slow, steady pulse of earth iron stability. When the ice hits the scar, don't let the fire react. Instead, use the logic I've taught you, the firewall, to channel the ice element around your core, not through it. Let it freeze the air around you but keep the core insulated. Use the cold as a perfect mold for the sigil, not as a weapon against your heart. It was a terrifying strategy, using the weapon aimed at her as a tool for success. It required absolute control, trust, and the perfect stability of the sync bond. Lysandra flew out at dawn, a magnificent crimson shadow against the blinding white peaks. Elias stood at the base, watching through a scrying lens, his heart pounding a frantic human rhythm. The ascent was brutal. As she neared the summit, the air turned corrosive. The raw ice element attacked her, the familiar, crippling cold seeking the vulnerability near her heart. Lysandra felt the crippling pain, the old shame, and the elemental fear. The ice roared in her mind, demanding surrender. Intervene, Elias. The ice seemed to whisper. You cannot survive this without him. But Lysandra remembered their merging, the calm, structured logic of his soul. She didn't fight. She deflected. She channeled the sync bond, not as a protective field but as a stabilizing framework. As the ice hit the old scar, she consciously guided the energy, using Elias's logic to form a perfect, cold boundary. She wasn't absorbing the ice, she was sculpting it. With a final, agonizing effort, she focused the power, shaping the raw, volatile ice into a gigantic, flawlessly geometric succession sigil. A symbol of power built not on wyvern fire but on human stability. The sight of the perfectly formed ice sigil, shimmering on the highest peak, sent a roar of approval through the watching wyverns. Lysandra had not only succeeded, she had performed a feat of elemental control that surpassed any wyvern in centuries. Valerius, watching from the hall, saw the sigil. He saw the impossible precision, the fusion of strength and structure. He finally understood. Lysandra landed, exhausted but triumphant. Valerius met her, his scales no longer cold but humbled. You have proven your worth, daughter, Valerius stated, his voice thick with defeat. You have transcended your weakness. You are worthy to rule. But the victory belonged to two. Valerius looked at Elias, the human who had engineered this triumph. He had wanted to break the influence of the lesser blood, but instead, he had created an undeniable, unbreakable partnership. The consort, Valerius declared before the entire court. The human's logic is now an integral part of the Morwen bloodline. The trial is past. You both have secured the throne. Elias had won the final political game. Lysandra had secured her destiny. They were the new, unstoppable force of Etheria. The victory of the ascension of the ice spires shattered the old guard's final resistance. Lysandra's success was proof not of her fire, but of the stable brilliance of the sync bond. Weeks later, the Hall of Judgment, renamed the Hall of Unity, was prepared for the coronation of the Arch-Wyvern. Elias stood beside Lysandra, no longer the consort, but the spouse of the Arch-Wyvern, a title carrying immense, unprecedented power. Valerius, old and defeated, performed the ritual, crowning his daughter with the crown of magma, a circlet of solidified fire. Lysandra Morwen, the woman who was meant to execute Elias, was now the arch-wyvern. During the crowning, Lysandra used the sync bond to send Elias a single powerful message. We did this. Our future is safe. The realm was stable, the iron ore reserve was full, and the threat of the old, self-destructive ways was gone. Elias had won the war for their survival. But in every successful merger, there is always one loose end. Lord Kale, disgraced and stripped of his power, was imprisoned in the deepest level of Etheria. He was not forgotten, however. He was allowed one final act of sabotage, driven by pure, festering hatred. Hours after the coronation, Kale used a hidden, unstable pulse of his remaining fire magic to breach his cell, not to escape, but to reach the primary portal chamber. Kale's aim was simple: destroy the sync bond. If he couldn't have the throne, he would ensure Lysandra's reign was short, and Elias would be dragged into oblivion with him. Kale found Elias alone in the portal chamber, reviewing the system's stability. Kale's massive form was a shadow of his former power, but his crimson eyes burned with terminal malice. You won the throne, analyst, Kale hissed, channeling his remaining fire magic into a volatile, unstable spear of plasma. But you won't live to rule. The stability you brought will die with you. I will shatter the portal, severing the sync bond and leaving your broken magic to consume my queen. Kale launched the spear of chaotic plasma, aiming not for Elias, but for the heart of the portal crystal. Elias didn't have time to use his elemental logic. He knew if the portal shattered, the unstable energy would violently consume Lysandra's core, leaving the realm without an arch-wyvern and plunging Etheria into irreversible chaos. In that single, desperate moment, Elias understood his final, human purpose. He was the consolidator of resources. His life was the ultimate resource. Elias channeled all the sync bond energy, the stability, the protection, the fire iron firewall, into his own body. He did not use it as a shield. He used himself as a living capacitor. He lunged forward, placing his own human body between the volatile plasma spear and the portal crystal. The chaotic magic hit him. There was no bright flash, no dramatic explosion. There was only a cold, sickening absorption. Elias's body took the full, unstable force of Kale's attack, drawing the deadly energy into the perfectly stable human core of the synchronization marker. The sync bond severed violently. Elias's body crumpled, still absorbing the remaining chaos. Kale stood paralyzed, horrified by the human's complete self-annihilation. Before he could process the destruction, Lysandra arrived, drawn by the sudden, painful silence of the severed bond. Lysandra saw Kale, the dying portal, and Elias, still, silent, his body absorbing the last remnants of the chaotic energy. Her grief was not human, it was elemental. A roar of molten fire, ancient and absolute, erupted from her core. She didn't use finesse, she used raw, terrifying power. Kale was vaporized instantly, his malice reduced to ash. Lysandra rushed to Elias. He was alive, but the light was fading from his human eyes. He had successfully absorbed the chaotic energy, stabilizing the portal and saving her throne, but the sheer elemental overload had destroyed the human vessel. Elias lifted a weak hand, his human voice fading to a whisper. The sync bond is broken, Lysandra. The logic is with you. The throne is safe. Lysandra held him, her tears steaming against his cooling skin. Elias, you were the key. You were the stability. I am the final sacrifice, Elias whispered, a faint smile touching his lips. I won the merger. With a final, gentle sigh, Elias Vance, the human analyst, died in the arms of the Dragon Wyvern Queen. The sync bond was broken, but the human logic and stabilized core remained sealed within Lysandra. Lysandra Morwen, the arch-wyvern, rose. She was now the absolute ruler of Etheria, with the perfect elemental stability engineered by the man she loved. She had the crown, but she had paid the ultimate cost, the loss of her human soulmate. 2 wyvern cycles, roughly 2 human years, had passed since the final sacrifice. The chaos Kale intended was extinguished by Elias's ultimate stability. Arch-wyvern Lysandra Morwen now ruled Etheria, not with her father's fear, but with a calculated, precise authority that had defined Elias's tenure. Lysandra had established the Consolidated Resource Directorate (CRD) as the central governing body, managed by wyverns trained in Elias's human logic. Etheria flourished. The iron ore reserve remained full, the defenses were invulnerable to both magic and technology, and the elemental reserves were managed with cold, mathematical efficiency. The realm had traded tyranny for structured prosperity. Lysandra was an arch-wyvern of unparalleled stability, yet she was deeply, permanently marked by loss. She still felt the ghost of the sync bond, the phantom limb of Elias's presence, a faint, continuous hum of human logic beneath her powerful, elemental core. Lysandra ensured Elias Vance was not forgotten. He was not honored as a warrior or a wyvern, but as the architect of stability. In the Hall of Unity where the wedding and the sacrifice took place, she commissioned a unique monument. It was a massive, perfectly cubic stone, carved not from magma or obsidian, but from pure earth-iron alloy, the very substance of Elias's elemental defense. This monument was called the Whispering Stone. Lysandra would often visit it, placing her hand on the cold, stable metal. One afternoon, standing before the stone, she felt a strong, familiar pulse. It wasn't the sync bond, but the human consciousness she had absorbed during their final moments of merging. The logic remains, Arch-Wyvern. Your position is safe. Execute the 5-year plan. Elias Vance was gone, yet his analytical mind was now an integral, non-magical advisory spirit within the core consciousness of the Wyvern ruler. He had won the ultimate merger. His logic was now the logic of the throne. Elias's legacy extended to the human world too, though unknowingly. Marcus Thorne, his career destroyed, vanished from the financial world, terrified of the forces Elias had hinted at. The company Thorne once led, Global Tech, was now quietly making billions from the earth-iron alloy technology, having reverse-engineered the sample Elias left behind. Humanity had unknowingly received a miraculous leap in metallurgy, a silent, final gift from the Wyvern realm, facilitated by the man who straddled both worlds. The portal in the Scottish Highlands was now perpetually masked by Elias's countermeasures, appearing on satellite as nothing more than a geologically dull rock formation. Etheria was safe, hidden, and stable thanks to the human mind that knew exactly how to hide. Lysandra now faced her final duty, the continuation of the bloodline. She was the last of the Morwins and she needed an heir. She chose an ancient, minor wyvern general, respected for his strength but lacking political ambition, a partner whose only purpose was biological. The general was honored, but the wyvern court knew the truth. Lysandra would raise the heir, not with the fire of the father, but with the structured stability inherited from her human spouse. One final time, Lysandra visited the Whispering Stone before facing her duty. "We won, Elias," she whispered, her voice layered with power and melancholy. "The realm is safe. You gave me everything." She felt the cool, firm presence of the stone, the logic, the stability, the essence of the analyst who had won the final merger. The greatest stability is always found in the future, Arch-Wyvern. Lysandra smiled, a small, private smile only the Whispering Stone could understand. The love between the dragon vampire and the human analyst had saved 2 worlds. Their life together was short, brutal, and tragic, but their unholy union had secured a stable, prosperous destiny for the Wyvern race, forever guided by the superior logic of Elias Vance.